Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We have an exceptional stack of sources today. It's detailing a really rapid-fire succession of U.S. policy shifts, new rules, legislative actions. I mean, in just the past few days, Washington has moved on, well, everything from artificial intelligence governance all the way to federal employee performance reviews. So our mission for this deep dive is to try and cut through that noise,
Right.
to distill the core facts and explain the real-world impact these changes have on your life. What's so fascinating about this particular stack is that it highlights a government simultaneously trying to assert national control over tech, over borders,
Right.
while also fighting these pretty bitter internal battles over funding and just getting things done. So let's unpack this.
It's a perfect snapshot of governance in 2025, really. We're looking at rules today that affect high-tech startups, the flow of international talent, commodity markets, and even the internal workings of the government bureaucracy itself. The accelerated pace is the story for sure, but I think the underlying tension is this federal drive to unify and regulate and control all these different areas.
Exactly. And the most forward-looking policy shift in this stack has to be the White House's move to establish a unified federal policy on artificial intelligence. This is coming from a major executive order, and it's designed specifically to stop states from, going their own way. What stands out in the source material is the main motivation here, preventing a regulatory patchwork. Why is the administration so worried about 50 different state-level AI laws?
Well, it really just comes down to economic acceleration.
Okay.
If you're a major tech company or even a fast-growing startup and you have to deal with conflicting rules across state lines, I mean, say California requires one type of bias testing for an AI model, but Texas requires a totally different one. That complexity is just an enormous barrier to entry. It slows innovation way down. The so what here is really the investment signal. By creating a national standard, the federal government is dramatically de-risking research and deployment for these big tech companies. This isn't just about avoiding confusion, it's about providing certainty, and certainty is fuel for capital investment. This unified approach tells the market the U.S. wants to accelerate AI under one roof.
And the government isn't just suggesting this, right? They're not just saying this is the better path. They're actively asserting their authority to enforce it. The sources are very clear on the legal tool they're using here.
They are, and this is where we have to use a key concept.
Preemption.
Preemption. Yeah. Preemption is the legal doctrine where federal law basically overrules or preempts any conflicting state laws. And the sources explicitly state that federal agencies are now instructed to start actively pushing back on state regulations that don't align with this new national AI framework. I mean, this is a bold move. It signals an intent to assert federal supremacy in a domain-emerging tech regulation, where states have, up to now, been pretty aggressive in setting their own consumer standards.
So they're drawing a line in the sand.
Exactly. By leaning into preemption this early, Washington is saying, on AI, the standard will be national, not localized.
That sets the stage perfectly for where we go next, because we move from regulating complex tech and state jurisdiction to regulating people and their digital identities.
Yeah.
Let's transition now to immigration policy and the rules governing who gets to work here. The sources are pointing to new, much stricter visa screening rules, and they're taking effect on December 15, 2025.
That date is important.
It is. And this involves high-skilled labor, specifically the H-1B visa, that's the main route for U.S. companies to hire skilled foreign workers, and the H-4 visa, which is for their spouses and children.
And this is a monumental shift for the entire visa application process. The key requirement taking effect is that all H-1B and H-4 visa applicants will now have their social media accounts subject to a mandatory review by immigration officers.
Mandatory review.
Mandatory. Now, the policy is designed to improve security, but the implications for privacy and just for the power dynamic between the applicant and the state are immediate and profound. Traditionally, visa applications focus on professional credentials, your education, your employment history.
Right, the objective stuff.
Exactly. Mandating access to social media, which often includes personal opinions, casual life events, even political leanings, that fundamentally shifts the assessment from those objective credentials to subjective lifestyle and belief systems.
That assessment change is critical. And there's a practical side to this that the sources highlight too, right? They mention that applicants might need to set their privacy settings to public.
Correct. The implication is if you want to apply for these visas, you may be required to expose years of your private digital history. And beyond the privacy concern, the logistics are just staggering. Immigration already faces immense backlogs.
Yeah.
So introducing a mandatory deep dive into the digital footprint of every single H-1B and H-4 applicant could just significantly exacerbate those processing delays. We are talking about slowing the entry of highly skilled talent that U.S. industries really rely on. So companies that depend on that talent flow will be watching that December 2025 date very, very closely.
Now, shifting gears a bit, but staying on the same topic, we also have to touch on a related and highly controversial legislative action from the U.S. House of Representatives. This one is about unaccompanied immigrant children. Just to give you the necessary context, this bill targets the existing protocols for processing children who arrive at the border without parents. Those protocols involve federal entities like the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS.
Right, and they're often governed by established legal settlements.
Exactly. But this new bill, according to the sources, introduces some really stark changes. It includes provisions for more invasive searches and for significantly longer detention periods for these children.
And the sources make it very clear that this bill is highly contentious. It sparked immediate and very intense negative reactions from a whole range of civil rights organizations and legal groups.
And of course, we're just reporting that finding without endorsing the bill or its critics.
Aw.
It simply reinforces the narrative we started with, that the federal government is trying to impose sweeping new control mechanisms on two very different demographics: international skilled workers on one hand and vulnerable border populations on the other.
It's all part of the same impulse, really, asserting stricter federal policy across the board.
Okay, so from human capital and digital screening, let's pivot entirely. Let's talk about physical capital and energy. Our next segment deals with regulatory policy in the energy sector, and it starts with a pretty significant delay from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA.
Right.
The EPA is delaying its final biofuel blending rules until 2026. Now, these rules are crucial. They dictate the required volume of biofuels, like ethanol, that have to be mixed into the nation's gasoline supply. This isn't just some internal EPA decision. It has massive external consequences.
The impact is felt immediately in the commodity market. This delay introduces a tremendous amount of uncertainty across three powerful interconnected sectors.
And those are
You have American farmers who need guaranteed demand for their corn and soy. You have the big energy companies who produce the base gasoline. And then you have the fuel blenders who have to plan their operations years in advance. When key regulatory metrics like blending volumes get delayed, uncertainty just floods the market. The immediate financial pressure is this: companies will often freeze or delay forward contracts. They'll halt major capital projects because they just don't know what the mandated compliance costs will look like in 2026.
So it's like a pause button.
It's a pause button on investment across the entire biofuel supply chain.
So that's the challenge of regulatory delay.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is we see the complete opposite happening on a parallel clean energy front. We see active legal challenge. This brings us to the battle over electric vehicle or EV infrastructure funds.
A very different dynamic.
Totally. We have several states, along with Washington, D.C., that have filed a lawsuit against the federal government. They are suing Washington for allegedly withholding billions of dollars, money that was promised for building out EV charging infrastructure. So it's a battle over money, but it feels like it's really a battle over execution.
That is precisely the tension point.
Yeah.
The federal government has committed to this massive national EV transition, right? They've promised billions to states to build charging stations, creating a big top-down policy goal.
Right.
But now the states are claiming the federal mechanisms, the speed, the strings attached, the bureaucracy are just bottlenecking the release of that money.
So the money's not getting where it needs to go.
It's not. And this lawsuit is significant because it highlights the friction between a federal policy mandate and state-level execution. It's a classic federal versus state spending fight, but it's playing out on the hyper-politicized stage of clean energy policy. The states are essentially saying, look, we agree with the goal, but if you don't release the funds as promised, the whole national transition stalls. It's an assertion of state control over the timeline and the mechanism of federal funds.
It's such a compelling contrast. You have centralized control asserted on AI and immigration, but decentralized control being demanded by the states on energy funding. Okay, so let's wrap up this deep dive by shifting to the internal operations of government itself. Specifically, a new housekeeping policy that affects thousands of federal employees.
This one's interesting.
It is. There's a new internal policy that limits the number of top performance ratings that federal agencies can distribute. It's essentially a hard cap. It means only a small, fixed percentage of employees in an agency can receive the highest possible performance score.
The immediate and, I think, obvious consequence, according to critics, is the impact on morale.
Of course.
If you know that your maximum effort is capped by some arbitrary percentage, like if only 10% of your division can get the top score, no matter how many people actually deserve it, it creates frustration and it can just dramatically reduce motivation.
But every policy has a stated intent, right? So the downside is reduced morale. What is the government's stated goal here? Why introduce such a strict cap? Is it just about cutting costs?
Well, the counterargument, and you often see this in internal documents for caps like this, is to combat grail inflation and prevent favoritism.
Ah, okay.
In a lot of agencies, high scores just became the default, which erodes the meaning of a top rating. So by enforcing a strict distribution curve, the government aims to ensure that the highest score truly signifies superior performance. It prevents managers from just giving everyone top marks to avoid conflict.
I see the logic, but what's the risk?
The ultimate danger, and the core insight for you, the listener, is the risk of talent flight. High performance ratings are directly tied to bonuses, career advancement, promotion eligibility within the federal system. If your top performing, most capable employees consistently hit this artificial ceiling, they will naturally start looking for opportunities in the private sector where their performance is rewarded based on merit, not a curve. So this policy could inadvertently drain the federal government of its most skilled, most efficient workers, and that ultimately harms public service.
That puts a neat bow on the sheer diversity of this stack. I mean, we've synthesized rules today that touched on every aspect of the American system.
Yeah.
The drive for unified national AI control.
Yep.
The imposition of strict digital screening on visa applicants starting in December 2025. The paralyzing delay of biofuel rules that affects commodity markets.
And the internal caps on federal talent that threaten government efficiency.
It covers so much ground.
This rapid movement across 4 wildly different sectors, it just reinforces that central theme we started with. Policy is shifting at an accelerated rate, and in almost every area, Washington, D.C. is attempting to assert or redefine its control.
Yeah, whether it's over technology, international migration, or its own internal workforce standards.
Absolutely. So what does this entire picture mean for you, the learner, as you track these developments? If you look at this collective action, the government successfully asserting authority to create unified national standards in new fields like AI, but simultaneously facing massive legal pushback from states over the slow execution and withholding of funding for existing national infrastructure like EV charging, it really reveals a systemic fault line.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to mull over. If the power of the federal government is shifting toward regulatory mandate, telling states what the rules are for AI, but it's struggling profoundly with budgetary execution, just getting EV funds out the door, what does this tension reveal about the future balance of power?
And maybe more importantly,
what level of long-term trust should we place in the government's ability to successfully implement and sustain any of these sweeping, newly implemented policies? A question of authority versus capability. Something certainly worth keeping an eye on. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.